Are you guys getting sick yet? How's that feel? If I spin, does that make you sick? Whoa. Okay. Right before hopping on to do this, we'll get to the Bible study in just a second. Carlos was asking, he was more joking. He wasn't, I don't think, asking a legitimate question that he wanted a legitimate answer to, but he did say, how big is your library? And I'm like, well, you're giving me an excuse to show off. And so I'm going to take it, no matter how much it's just letting into my sinful pride. But if I back up a little bit here, he was asking, so like, that's my commentary library, which is, of course, what I spend most of my time working on. It's actually not all commentaries. There's a small section at the bottom with some apologetic stuff. But pretty much, that's Genesis. I think that's the Torah. And that gets us through Kings and Chronicles. And that's what starts the Psalms and Proverbs. Then down there, it's missing a bunch. I left space for Jeremiah when I put all my Jeremiah books back, because I'm studying Jeremiah. That whole shelf is Daniel. In fact, actually, I feel like more than that whole shelf is Daniel. No, that shelf is... No, there's more than that for Daniel. I don't know. It might be Daniel somewhere else, too. But that is all the minor prophets going to my bobbleheads. Then starts the Gospels. Matthew through Mark. And then Luke through Acts begins there. Acts starts there, goes to Romans. I think that's all Romans and 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. I'm a little lost here. Oh, yeah, the Galatians, Ephesians, the Colossians. And you guys are getting kind of the picture. Revelation, it ends off. Actually, Revelation's like two shelves. It's that shelf and onto that shelf. And then that's all just other, like, eschatology reference books. So, anyway, now Carlos has his answer. And then I got all those books, and I got those books in those boxes and that shelf over there. Then I got another special shelf over there. That's the fire shelf. Ooh, there we go. I'm not looking at my camera. I'm looking there. The fire shelf. That's where I put all my, like, favorite books, or books like by, like, you know, Bounds, Moody, Spurgeon, Ravenhill, all those guys. Those books are all like reference books, counseling, creation, books on hymns, books on evangelism, books on parenting. Up there is just alphabetized different books. And yeah, there's some Spurgeon up there, and there's some other stuff. But anyway, there you go. That's what he was like, how many books do you have? Well, I've got a lot of books. And interesting, curious, there's at least 5 or 6 or something of you watching right now. I'm going to put my speaker in. I'm curious how much from right here until right here, how the sound changes. From what I understand, my microphone, the microphone's slightly quieter, but more clear. Some people would rather just be louder. I'm trying to kind of find the best combo there. Anyway, all right, people. Let's do a Bible study now. That was way too long of an introduction. Since all we're talking about today is forbidden sex, I'll keep it nice and short. So, and I'm going to do some summarizing in here because there's some sections that is just pretty simple. But it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, chapter 18 of Leviticus, verse 1, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. According to the doings of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, you shall not do. And according to the doings of the land of Canaan where I am bringing you, you shall not do. Nor shall you walk in their ordinances. All right, now Carlos just gone. Carlos, you got to rewind this because I did the whole library tour per you asking how many books I had. So I'll come back and check that in a little bit. So let's see. Did I just read? You shall, verse 4, observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. So here's the introduction. And basically, he's telling them that they shouldn't follow the practices of Egypt and of Canaan, where they're coming from and where they're going to. This is actually really similar to what that one guy, Joshua, says in chapter 24, verse 15, right? As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. But right before that, I love that he points out, hey, you know, worship whoever you want to worship. If you want to worship Yahweh, then worship him.
But if you want to worship the ones that our fathers worshipped, back beyond the river. So he's going back to the pagan gods of Mesopotamia that Abraham worshipped. And he goes, or the gods of Canaan, the one in the land we're going to. If you want to worship those gods, worship them. That's the thing. He's saying, whether it's those gods or those gods, whatever. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And what you're going to find out is that when it comes to sex, God has laid out his plan. Now, to make it fair, God was there first. God was there first. And he laid out a plan, right? From the beginning, it wasn't so, Jesus tells the Pharisees, right? That's the idea. God laid out a plan, and since then, God has made accommodations and clarifications and prohibitions to that plan. But the plan was for one man and one woman to come together in sexual union, and the two shall become one flesh. And that's the way it'll stay until they die. That's God's plan. And so as other things start popping up, changes in humanity, God makes new prohibitions. And what we really find is the law restricted, and that actually in the New Testament, we have even more restriction. Doesn't usually seem that way. But when Jesus raises the bar and talks about not looking with lust, that's raising the bar beyond even what we do to what we think. And so God has a plan for sex. Now, this first section I can really summarize a lot. Really, verse 6 to 18. 6 to 18. I'm not even going to read it. Well, I'll read 6. None of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him and uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord. So what it's saying is that incest is banned. Near of kin. You might notice, right? Who did Cain marry? That's that classic question. Whenever I joke about Bible Q&A 101, who did Cain marry is always the one that I always jokingly use. And Cain married his sister, because that's the only people who existed on the planet beside his mom. Eventually, actually, Cain would have had nieces. Cain actually could have married a niece. That's actually totally possible. But it would have been a near of kin. Now, God knew that that was going to be a necessity at the very beginning. And he didn't call it immoral or wrong, because that was just the way the world was created. And there's a whole thing about all humanity coming back. If you're going to have all humanity come back to one man and one woman, it was a thing. But the other thing is that Adam and Eve were handcrafted by God. They had no genetic defects nor no abnormalities. The other thing about this that might just sound funny to you guys, I mean, it's just still your sister, but don't forget, when you live like 900 years old, your brother or sister might be 50 years in age different from you, and yet that'd be like 5 years difference in age. And we know lots of people who are married with a 5-year difference. That's really not a big deal once you're a grown-up. Feels like eternity when you're a teenager, but when you're an adult, it's like whatever, 5 years just seems like nothing between two people in age. We're the same age. Right, Sarah? No, you're not 5 years older. Anyway, but the point is that here we have brother and sister, but they could have been 50 years apart and never even hardly knew each other. I mean, so anyway. So, back to Leviticus. Near of kin. Verse 7 is father and mother. Verse 8, stepmom, stepsister. 10 is grandchildren. 11 is half-sister. 12 is your aunt. 14, aunt through marriage. 16, sister-in-law. And so again, like these are all scenarios. I'm just giving you, it just lists them off, all the different family members. So you don't need me to read in detail where it's very repetitive, but incest is banned. Verse 19 now, actually verse 18, nor shall you take a woman as a rival to her sister to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive. Now here's an interesting thing, is that this is taken rival to her sister in the literal sense, i.e. not marrying sisters. So you marry both of the sisters and, one husband. John Trapp, Puritan commentator, He's stretching it, but he was arguing that, no, you shouldn't take another woman as a wife while her sister in the Lord is still alive. So he was actually arguing for monogamy here and not having polygamy. Why isn't polygamy strictly banned? Well, like I said, actually, throughout the Bible, we actually see an increase in God bringing people closer back to his perfect plan. In the New Testament, it's very clearly expressed that monogamy is God's plan. It wasn't this way from the beginning. One man, one woman, the two become one flesh. And Jesus says that was the plan in the beginning, and people got way off track. And so God started reeling them in. To not look with lust isn't mentioned until the New Testament. Does that mean God didn't think it in the Old? No. But 613 Levitical laws, he reels them back in closer and closer to his ideal. He did tell the kings not to do it. They shouldn't multiply wives, but once again, they didn't listen. David probably just thought he was adding wives. He didn't get to multiplication yet, right? That's different. Verse 19, you shall not approach a woman and uncover her nakedness as long as she is in her customary impurity. So we talked about this when we were doing bodily discharges, that because of the sanctity of blood and everything else, that it was a forbidden act. Verse 20, and chapter 15, they mentioned, but here's the impurity if you do it. So why would they say what happens if you do it if it's supposed to be banned? Well, accidents happen is kind of the explanation for that. Verse 20, moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile her. So there's adultery. Incest got a big section. Really, they were clarifying what incest was. And maybe it's because people were just going to say father and daughter. They're like, no, not father and daughter, not brother and sister, not aunt and uncle, not grandparents, not. So they really covered their bases there. And the rest of these, they're kind of boom, 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 boom. And so again, it's adultery in verse 20. Having sex with someone who's married is wrong. And as we're going to find, sex outside of marriage is very clearly explained as well. In fact, later on, we'll have the clarifications like, if two couples, they actually slept together. Back then it was. Now you just have to get married because you decided to do the act of marriage. And that was kind of the solution in the Old Testament. Verse 21, you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire of Molech, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord. I am the Lord. So here is child sacrifice, which was something that they did. Now, I thought this was the forbidden sex chapter. Totally. That's exactly what it is. So why child sacrifice? Everything else in this chapter has to do with sex. Well, it's because child sacrifice had to do with sex. Because you had to do something with those unwanted children. And today, child sacrifice is still the practice when you have sex. You've got Plan B, you've got abortion, which Plan B is abortion. I mean, that's what it is. When you have the unwanted result of having sex, you just kill the child. That was the solution back then. That is the solution today. And that is why it was forbidden that back then, and that's why it should be forbidden today. It's very clear and straightforward. I'm not going to go down the long trail of making the case for abortion or the case against abortion, and explaining it all. But that's the idea, is that, at conception, life begins. There's really no way around that. Every argument you try and make just falls apart horribly when you try and say, well, life doesn't start till this point. Life doesn't start till that point. And it's just one of those things where it's like, it doesn't matter what time of the year I go out and put that 1 year long Roundup or salt in one of my neighboring farms' fields. Do I kill them all when the trees are just budding? Do I kill them all when the plants haven't even been sown yet? If I salt the earth and a farmer wanted to plant seeds there, it's like, well, again, it doesn't matter because I just killed the process that would have gone on if I hadn't intervened. And that's the big thing, is that even if a child doesn't have consciousness, well, neither does an unconscious person. The only difference is that when a person's in a coma, you don't know if they're going to come out. But if you don't intervene, right, unless something happens naturally, but likely the child is going to come out and alive as long as you don't get in the way. And so that's, I think, the big thing with abortion is that life does start at conception, so it's nothing less than murder. And this was a problem in the Old Testament, just like in the New. All the heavy things today. 22, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. The Old Testament and the New Testament both forbid homosexuality. It's extremely clear. And your two best New Testament references are 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, where it mentions arsenokoides and it mentions the other one. What is it? Malakos, that's right. So the idea there is in 1 Corinthians 6, 9, it says neither homosexual nor sodomite. To be really clear to the point, Paul mentions both sides of a homosexual relationship. Malakos means soft to the touch. And that was the word used for the more feminine partner, the receiving partner in a homosexual relationship. And no matter what people try and do to work around this, the other word, arsenokoides, arsen, it means men in Greek, and koides is a bed. And so it's men sleeping together. These words are used throughout ancient Greek literature. And it speaks of homosexual acts in ancient Greek literature. This is what the stuff means. So it's not like there's any question as to what these words mean. And even because some people say, well, the Bible doesn't say. The Bible doesn't say. Romans chapter 1 spells it out super duper clearly, where it speaks of in Romans chapter 1, verse 27. Likewise, also the men leaving the natural use of the woman burn in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, receiving in themselves the penalty of the error which was due. So it spells it out. So it's no longer now what the word means. Last thing, I picked it up at the youth conference last year. It was really good, or the young adult conference, is people point out, well, Jesus never spoke out against homosexuality. And you know what? Totally true. And you know what that does? It confirms that homosexuality is a sin. Here's why. Jesus didn't show up rebuking people for doing things the right way. He was there trying to fix where religion had messed stuff up. And what we find is that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all those guys, the Jewish nation as a whole, they had some messed up views on divorce and marriage, where they were just divorcing more freely. They weren't committing to the sanctity of the covenant of marriage. But one thing that they did forbid, and they were straight up about it, was homosexuality. Jesus never spoke on the subject because there was no need to clarify anything on the subject. So Jesus remained silent because people understood at that point that was forbidden by God's law. Last but not least in our little section here, nor shall you mate with an animal to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before the animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. You'd think I wouldn't have things to share about this, but before logging on today, I've been previewing Leviticus. Normally I don't look ahead too much on our studies, but Leviticus deserves a little extra time for me just brushing up. You know, there are numerous major countries in the world where bestiality is not only legal, but popular. I was looking up studies about Colombia, Brazil, Japan, places I'm forgetting the Finland, Germany, Mexico, and numerous states in the United States have no laws forbidding bestiality. I counted at least 10 when I was looking at a list, and some, things were changing, but so it's very common. In fact, reading about border towns in Mexico that Put on sex shows with donkeys and animals so that people from the United States can just simply zip down over the border and go watch. You'd think it's not common, but it is. And the reality of it is that once you start compromising marriage, things quickly go downhill. People think that gay marriage is like the issue, but you see, what it is just the beginning, because pedophilia and incest follow very closely behind. And bestiality is right there as well. And I remember lots of different things like Washington State. We've only had bestiality be illegal for about 15 years in Washington State, because when I was in college, I do recall a story of the man who was a Boeing engineer in Enumclaw being killed by a horse. I'll just stop there. So, and he didn't get kicked. So, that's when Washington made it illegal, where I live, right? Point is, though, is that God's holy standards keep getting brought lower and lower. And so sometimes we do need to take a stand. And when we compromise, even in little things, all we're doing is opening the door for the next compromise to take place. And so, yeah, we do need to hold fast on what marriage is and God's plan for marriage. And we're not just doing it, because we're this or we're that. Like, we're trying to help our society not fall down a deep, dark, dangerous pit. So, let's finish this chapter. Verse 24, do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. In Genesis 15:16, God told Abraham, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. He's like, they're wicked, but I'm going to hold out to the last second before I finally just purge this land of these wicked people. It's worth noting, too, bestiality was recorded in Egypt and in Canaan. We have ancient writings where it was part of their worship of their pagan gods. And you kind of think about it. I'm sure we've all seen, some ancient pagan gods where they look part man, part animal. And so the idea of man and animal coming together just isn't so strange when you think about it that way. For the land is defiled, verse 25. Therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. You shall therefore keep my statutes, my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nations or any stranger who dwells among you. For all these abominations the men of the land have done who were before you, and thus the land is defiled, lest the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomit out the nations who were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit them shall be cut off among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so you shall not commit any of these abominations and customs which are committed before you, that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am the Lord your God. And it's worth noting now, 1 Kings in 3 different places. I want to say verse 1 Kings and 2 Kings. Man, it's in Kings. I was looking at references earlier. Multiple places in the New King James, it says perverted persons. Those were people committing homosexuality. And we know, I think Asa started it, Manasseh continued it, having children. No, Manasseh is the only one. Oh, now I'm drawing a blank now. I know Manasseh did. Children passing through the fire, his own children. So this practice of sacrificing children to Molech is when God finally says, hey, enough's enough. And he has a godly grandson, Josiah, who God blesses, but he's like, but after Josiah, I'm done, right? And it's going to quickly come to an end. And that's where we're at in the book of Jeremiah at our churches. So we find that, yes, the Israelites commit these sins, and God vomits them out of the land, just like he promised he would. And so again, there are so many beautiful and wonderful promises of the Bible that should comfort us and console us and keep us and assure us. But there's many promises of judgment, promises of chastisement, promises of what God will do when we go off and do things our own way. And they're just as much a promise. So let's heed God's word and take him at it and believe him. Amen. All right. You guys have a great day today. It's Thursday, Women's Bible Study. If you're a woman in the Lower Valley, you should go. God bless you guys. Take care.